swearing. Daily beans, daily beans. Daily beans, daily beans.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Today, we welcome the author of the new book, Here Right Matters, An American Story, a key witness in the first impeachment proceeding against the former guy. Please welcome Colonel Alexander Vindman. Sir, it's an honor to speak with you, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
I'm very excited to talk to you. I know many of our listeners and many millions of Americans consider you a hero in this story, and we've all gotten very familiar with the Here Right Matters hashtag. That was just a bombshell of a moment. So we appreciate your time. Now, I've read the book through, and I have to say it's extremely riveting. You begin with the call, right? You delineate your life into two phases, pre-call and post-call, and you describe the call in detail and how you learned that day what the shadow diplomacy effort was all about, right? What Rudy, Sondland, and Mulvaney had been up to. And after the call, you sought out your brother and made a prolific declaration to him. Can you tell us why you spoke to your brother and what you told him?
Sure. Yeah. I guess first I might mention that, it's not like the whole thing, the whole kind of nefarious enterprise was revealed in that moment. It had been unfolding for months, with Giuliani and his pronouncements. Just weeks before I made my first kind of deep concerns heard when I reported Gordon Sondland's, declaration that there should be quid pro quo, an investigation in exchange for a White House meeting, and he attested to the fact that Mick Mulvaney was driving him. Really, the biggest revelation was that it went all the way straight to the top, and that the president himself was responsible. And if up until that point, my awe and reverence for the office of the President of the United States kind of counseled that I shouldn't hang this around the president. After that moment, it was impossible to do so. It was clear that the president was involved, and as a military officer, it's a tough kind of pill to swallow that the president is trying to harm the interest of the United States and undo the democracy, undo our democracy, tilt the scales and undermine free and fair elections. That was the big revelation for me. Not that all this stuff was kind of already simmering. And in part, that's why I hate referring to him. You refer to him as the other guy or the last guy or something like that. I hate to refer to him as the president because he did such a dishonor to that office. But you wanted me to answer the question about my twin brother, who was the senior ethics official on the National Security Council. Twins, we were the NSC twins. It was frankly the first time and maybe the last time we'll serve in the same place together, or certainly in uniform. It was a unique opportunity, and I wanted to pull him into this, wise or not, because I wanted kind of both another set of eyes and another set of ears to witness my report to John Eisenberg, who I didn't have every confidence in that he would do the right thing, but I kind of hoped there and walked in with the intention of getting him to counsel the president that what he was doing was awful and probably unlawful. And I walked into Eugene's office. I closed the door, gave him a dramatic pause, didn't kind of like start ribbing him like I would usually do. Made sure I had his undivided attention. And I told him, if what I'm about to tell you ever becomes public, the president will be impeached. And that was just, that just kind of captured the severity of what I had witnessed, rather than, prophetic that it was going to happen that way, because it was still in classified channels. I had, I had no idea that this was going to become public. I thought that the officials I would report to would somehow kind of roll back this transgression, this travesty. And that was my intention. But I did not miss in any way the import of the moment with those comments clearly. And the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, and I assume it's hard to convey the seriousness of what you witnessed to the public, because we had been taking a fire hose of scandal from this White House from day one. And even now, as certain revelations are coming out about the former guy and the Department of Justice, it's kind of hard to talk about the seriousness and the depth of corruption that that was there. And I think that that's kind of by design. I think that was sort of by design, like drown everything out with just this litany of scandal.
Well, I think that's exactly right. Frankly, there's in you that are kind of sets in with ever increasing scandals. You would think that there was whatever that reporting was right around the time of the election would be kind of like would separate him from his constituency when he was when he was pretty vulgar about how he treats women. But that didn't seem to that eroded kind of this idea that there are morals and ethics, and that continued to progress throughout the entirety of his tenure, where the bar was set increasingly lower and expectations were set increasingly lower. So, the scandals that you would have thought early on would kind of bring down a presidency didn't. And there is no bottom, there is no floor to how far, he was willing to go, the kind of damage he was willing to do to the country. The good thing is that in a lot of ways he was his own worst enemy, and he was just not that competent. And if he was a true, he's even if we hang around his head the fact that he's a villain, if he was like a criminal mastermind or kind of a mastermind villain, we would be in a much worse situation. But oftentimes, as much as kind of being disruptive to the good order and function of government, he was also destructive to himself, which is, frankly, in a lot of ways, his background and his legacy is that everything he touches, kind of, as Rick Wilson says, everything he touches dies. That it was the same with his business interests, everything along the way. So, yeah.
ETTD, right? Hashtag, another good hashtag. You actually mentioned later in the book, but you address the lack of competency and lack of honesty, professionalism, etc. If memory serves, there in one of the later chapters. And this is when you were about to go into the National Security Council. And you say you were warned. You knew it was going to be a challenge, but you were also warned. Talk about that. Who warned you?
It's I had a couple of decades of public service under my belt, and had been fortunate enough to kind of achieve through hard work and kind of through a proven track record, ever increasing positions of responsibility and importance. And I, in a way, thought that I could continue to contribute, even though, I knew who he was even before he ran for office, because I grew up in New York City. He had this kind of, this really interesting reputation as a failed businessman, as a kind of unsavory character. But I thought that I could still kind of, offer counsel. I don't know if that was pride or ego or hubris. I mean, obviously, I in this regard, I was not entirely successful, although the things that the president wasn't focused on directly, I was able to have a very positive influence on. And that's the legacy of a whole cohort of public servants that were able to serve very honorably and continue to keep this country on course and, implement a national security strategy as long as the president wasn't involved. It's when the president became involved in these affairs that he wanted us to work on that things got derailed. But I went into the position largely with eyes wide open. And that's because when Fiona Hill asked me to join the team, I still had about 8 months of time that I had to finish up with at the Pentagon before before I was released to go on to the White House. And in that time, before I took the interview, and after that, I did some due diligence. I talked to military folks that were there, and I received a warning that there is nothing as perilous as this White House. It's a viper's den. People that deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times are like, this is a more dangerous environment in a lot of ways. So I went in there. Again, some of my experience counseled that it's a environment that I could successfully navigate. 3 years in Moscow was about as far from a picnic as you could imagine. It's a fishbowl. It's a truly beleaguered environment for an American diplomat, let alone a military attaché to serve in, where you're constantly under scrutiny. They're constantly trying to trip you up. Your surveillance, looking to kind of did public protests against you whenever you're traveling, all sorts of crazy stuff. So I was in a lot of ways prepared for that environment, and at the same time, not quite prepared for everything. But I had all the appropriate warning that I needed to at least be armed to be cautious. But on the other hand, I also had kind of an idealistic notion that I could still do some good, and that's why I went there. That is what I had in my mind when I went to the National Security Council.
Yeah, you talk about that quite a bit in the book, and dedicated civil servants trying to ride it out and perhaps do some good in those positions. I myself worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for a very long time prior to the former guy being elected, and I'll put elected in air quotes there. But even in that environment, down at the GS-14 level, trying to push back against privatization and all that stuff in the Department of Veterans Affairs where I worked. But my podcast came under investigation, and your friend and mine, Mick Mulvaney, had announced to a group of donors, "Hey, we found a cool new way to get rid of government employees. We just move their jobs across the country and force them to quit."
Yep.
And you'll never guess what happened to me. That exact same thing. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the traits you talk about with Zelensky, but I have to take a quick break. Will you stay with me?
Sure.
Everybody, welcome back. We are talking with Colonel Vindman, author of Here, Right Matters. I always get that Right Matters here, Right Matters mixed up for some reason. Probably one of the most famous lines.
It works both ways. One of
the most famous. Yeah, it does. It truly does. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you mentioned a few times in earlier chapters, Zelensky's experience as a comedian. And as a comedian myself, I was struck by that. You said Zelensky's experience helped him in dealing with the former president. How did you find that skill set applied? Because it was really an interesting observation.
Yeah, he's a very funny man. But you hit on something kind of implicitly about the book, which is it's not a Trump book. I mean, there's an opening chapter to kind of set the dramatic stage, but really in a lot of ways the president is a kind of a foil, kind of like the pivot point, kind of the buffoon pivot point. There should be a sense I don't hold back against this guy that is really an enemy of this country. But that's what he is. And it's a story really about how to do the right thing under the most adverse circumstances, and the deep portion of my background that contributed to navigating this difficult affair. And in a way, this question about Zelensky hits on some of this, because it's because of my experience in, either as an immigrant from that part of the world, from Ukraine, learning Russian and being a fluent Russian speaker, and then being trained as a Ukrainian linguist in the Defense Language Institute, which is something that, the House Republicans kind of missed when they questioned me, that the only reason I spoke Ukrainian is, it wasn't the language I learned at home. It was Russian. It was Ukrainian, was because of the Defense Language Institute. Anyway, I had a chance to watch Zelensky, whose programs were in Russian, by the way. And as part of my homework on the guy, as he was still campaigning, before it was clear that he was going to be the front runner, and I made the judgment that he was going to be probably the lead candidate. At one point, it was between him and Ukraine's most famous rock star, but the rock star backed out. And Zelensky played a character on this show called Servant of the People, where he stumbled into being a president, and then kind of his escapades about navigating presidency in Ukraine, where there's endemic corruption, and trying to do the right thing. And I thought that, he both captured the imagination, but he also had the charisma, and could translate his star power and his magnetism into a successful election run. And he did. And I was in a position to kind of see this coming, and, listen to his shows and kind of see how those prepared him for his, because a lot of the things he encounters to this day are segments of shows that he had recorded. And be in a position to really, frankly, the whole goal was to bring the countries together for a common cause, which is to advance the interests of democracy, help the Ukrainians kind of shake off a legacy of corruption through a vigorous anti-corruption campaign, reforms, and all of this in mind for the benefit of the United States, which has enormously benefits from a Ukraine that's integrated into Europe and not part of Russia's camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to wrap up with a famous quote from the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, where he said, "It should not be underestimated. Russia without Ukraine ceases to become an empire. Russia with Ukraine subordinated and suborned automatically becomes an empire." And we were facing enormous challenges from Russia now. Imagine how they might be magnified with Russia, more powerful and emboldened.
Yeah, very true. And even on the call, Zelensky was able to sort of read the room, which is something that comics have a lot of familiarity with, and ingratiate himself to the former president. And it gives me the creeps every time I have to say president too, because I'm a former service member and all that, and so to see the office sullied the way that it was is hard to swallow. But I think that's super fascinating because in many ways, just to be able to sort of get him on your side, it takes talent. But you talk about everything that sets you up for this experience, because a lot of this book, and I love this, a lot of this book goes into your childhood, growing up, and then your experience in ROTC and how the Vindman
being a rascal,
the Vindman boys were late bloomers, but when we get together, it's good stuff. I think that I really encourage everybody to buy the book so you can read this background. And there was a really like a gut punch, heart wrenching moment when you talk about the loss of Sarah and how that prepared you in many ways and sort of changed your point of view a little bit. Can you talk about that, what happened and how that sort of informed you going forward?
Yeah, I'll tell you that this is a difficult topic for me and for my wife, and I deflect, which is what I'm going to do here. I really try not to think about it because it's probably about the lowest. I mean, it was the lowest moment. I've kind of never responded to anything quite like that. It was difficult, and I tend to kind of do what guys do, which is suppress and stuff like that, and think about other things. And try to still be supportive for my wife when she thinks about that loss. And it's a loss of like our hopes and dreams for a larger family, or a loss of these our hopes and dreams for Sarah, which we only got a chance to know for a week. She followed, in a lot of ways. I take some solace in the fact that things unfolded the way they did, and we ended up with Eleanor, our 10-year-old, and she's an absolute miracle. Love her. This is the center of our universe. My wife says that she's got me wrapped around her finger. Probably that's true. And things unfolded the way they did, and we ended up with Eleanor, but that doesn't really entirely soften the blow of, it's just kind of a way to rationalize that loss. But one of the biggest takeaways is that it really puts things in perspective. What really matters, that mattered. The fact that serving in combat and people died in defense of this country, that mattered. The relationships that I had developed and the family support around me, the people face to face that provided support and encouragement through this versus the idiotic, public attacks. And I took the president's attacks in a lot of ways as a badge of honor. Him and the Laura Ingrams of the world, I took that as a badge of honor because these are people I have zero respect for, and I'm being attacked by them, but at the same time feeling the love from my family and from Americans at some point when, there was a means to access me through my synagogue and so forth. And I received thousands of letters of support. It's really, really puts things in perspective. And that's one of the things I think I've been very fortunate to have: perspective about life, perspective about what matters, perspective about this country in a lot of ways, which is a unique, amazing, wonderful place I did this interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger yesterday, and just to hear, like, it was me, him, and Bianca Goldberg, a CNN senior political correspondent, and we were all immigrants, just talking about the wonderful kind of perspective on America, and how, in spite of all of our challenges, this is, a unique a place that still is growing and developing and striving towards this more perfect union, but it's the best country in the world. I benefit from having perspective and overcoming challenges and having successes, the combination of everything that weighed in on the way I managed this, my role in the impeachment, frankly.
Yeah, true. And the foil of the book, as you say, the former guy, he completely lacks that kind of perspective and understanding. He can't understand somebody who would do something for someone else or for a cause bigger than themselves, which led to his disparaging war dead and veterans, as we know from that famous August article that came out last year, which really knocked me upside the head. I'm sure it did you as well. But also, again, unsurprising, shocking and unsurprising seems to be the theme.
Yeah, I think that's right. Jeffrey Goldberg, my friend, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, wrote that piece, and then he was, savagely attacked by the right. Not all that dissimilar than, to my own predicament, where in my case, the White House actually sent out attack talking points, but in the most kind of ham-handed manner. They sent it out not just to the Fox Newses and OANNs, they sent it out like to not partisan networks. And then it ended up becoming a story because White House sends out attack talking points on an NSC staffer or a White House staffer. But the kind of methodology of demonizing character assassination, taking issue with process to distract from the massive wrongdoing by the president and his kind of proxies is a standard playbook, and the same thing that you find in the authoritarian world. Same kind of methodologies, same kind of demonization of the truth and undermining of the fact that there are, in fact, like, absolute facts, indisputable facts. This is all kind of out of the fascist authoritarian playbook. But the commentary on service members, I wasn't there at this particular meeting, but it strikes a chord with me because there's little doubt that this was said, and Jeffrey Goldberg's reporting is very sound, that the president would call people that serve somebody other than themselves, selfless servants, suckers and losers, because he doesn't understand that. If there is not a transactional kind of benefit for him, then it's not something that it's not even that it's something he doesn't understand. It's not that he doesn't want to do it or that he doesn't see a benefit. He just simply doesn't understand the very basic notion of serving something other than yourself and that kind of mercenary approach.
Yeah, and I think that's something that he was passed down to him from his father.
And unfortunately to the children also.
Yeah, and that's obviously really weird, strained relationships and just purely transactional, like you said. And I want to ask, before I let you go here, just a couple more questions. One of the big stories that I don't think got enough attention was your being uninvited on that Ukraine trip. And I wanted you, have we learned anything else about that or anything else new that you can talk about with regards to that particular slight?
Yeah, well, I don't know enough about it. And, one of the regrets in my testimony is when Representative Sewell, I think from Alabama, asked a question, and she said, are you the target of kind of reprisals and retaliation? And at the time, thinking about my career and how to kind of save it, I said no. And in fact, I already knew that I was that was wishful thinking on my part, frankly, if anything, because I already had been the target of retaliation. I'd been ostracized by the political class at the White House. There was a trip that Ambassador Bolton had taken to 3 of my countries in my portfolio that the reason that directors travel is to maximize the benefits, to provide kind of on the ground support, to add context to whatever the discussions are. to all sorts of different reasons that directors on the National Security Council travel with the principal. And to be clear, it's not a very thick layer. You have the National Security Advisor, you have the senior directors, and then you have the directors that lead portfolios. They're the ones that actually are the workhorses that make stuff happen. They convene the deputy assistant secretaries to kind of to synchronize U.S. policy and so forth. And I quickly figured out that that it was as a result of my expressing concerns about this phone call, and I ended up being also disinvited to meetings and other things of that nature. But that was maybe in certain ways working up. The reason I stuck around another several months, if these things started to unfold in August, I didn't leave until February, is one, is I wasn't going to be kind of bullied out of there. And two, I could still work very effectively with my professional counterparts out of departments and agencies, even, and still kind of work through in a way through even seniors up until John Bolton left, and it became more difficult. But anyway, I could still do my job in part, and that's really why I stuck around.
Yeah, and I think the story at the time was that the former guy actually thought someone else was the expert, and nobody wanted to embarrass him. Was that an excuse, or do you think that was a real thing?
No, I think that's the real thing. There's a guy named Kash Patel that was a Devin Nunes acolyte, kind of inserted into the National Security Council by kind of direction of the president and the president's offices, the staff secretary, and then was kind of a direct pipeline from what was going on by the professional staff to the political class. And this is an individual that maneuvered himself into increasingly senior positions, ultimately as chief of staff to the Department of Defense by serving in these kind of like, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it. Certainly a kind of by doing political bidding was elevated.
Yeah, he's definitely there leading up to the insurrection in the Pentagon there. So then I'm hoping the 1-6 Commission and perhaps at some point the Department of Justice can look into that and get to the bottom of it. Finally, I want to ask you, we recently learned a former guy had a phone call with the former acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen. And we talked about this a little bit at the top of the interview. And this is where he asked him to announce corruption in the 2020 election, much like the call with Zelensky, where he said, you don't even really have to investigate. Just say you're investigating Biden. And I see so many parallels between the call with Rosen that we got the notes from the Department of Justice handed to the Senate and the call with Zelensky. Given your seat at the table during the Zelensky call, what were your thoughts when the news broke on the Rosen call?
I think the attorneys and the prosecutors would call this a continuing enterprise, maybe a continuing criminal enterprise, I think is more appropriate. And it doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean, in a lot of ways, the president was encouraged to continue on this enterprise because of a lack of accountability. He was not censured. He was not rebuked. There was really kind of minimal reaction from a Senate that swore an oath to uphold and to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, uphold kind of the basic principles and ethics and values of good governance, and they abrogated that responsibility. And I think that encouraged the president to act with impunity going into the COVID pandemic. And there's little doubt that, for instance, if the president was removed, that Mike Pence would have handled it much better, because he was a kind of a more in the ilk of a standard chief executive, and he wouldn't have downplayed COVID, and we would not have had 600,000 dead. And that's something that's, to me, it's that connection is as clear as day. And then the economic mismanagement by trying to downplay COVID when it could have been dealt with severely and mercilessly to handle this pandemic, and into a inflaming protest in the summer, and seeking to kind of inflame a base that was concerned about losing their position in American society, and the Black and brown and the minority populations kind of having had enough and being being victimized, standing their ground, the president seeking to inflame that instead of kind of add ointment and provide succor to the kind of to these hardships, and then going into stealing the election himself, because that's who's trying to steal the election. Donald Trump attempted to but failed to steal an election by propagating this lie that there was all sorts of election interference and election wrongdoing, which didn't exist by all accounts, and was proven to be false and hollow. And then launching an insurrection, violent insurrection to retain power. So, to me, that is a absolutely clear logic link from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, it's all connected. I've been saying, people are like, DOJ investigate, arrest Trump now. That's a massive case. If we start all the way back, we can even maybe start back in 2016 with Russia. But clearly, that line between the Zelensky call, COVID, and the insurrection and the big lie, it's just a bright, shining line to me as well. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And again, send some love over to NatSec hobbyist Rachel, who's just if you're not, I'm pretty sure every single 100% of the listenership of this show is already following her on Twitter. But if you're not, you should create a Twitter account just for the purpose of following both you and Rachel. And I really do appreciate your time today. It's been truly an honor to speak with you. I consider you a hero. And everybody here, Right Matters is available now. You can grab it wherever you get books, and it's a wonderful read. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody, we'll be right back with the good news.